confused. I have my
Hey, we're
blind.
fixing to go live.
Okay. I can't seem to let go of anything in my vision here.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's hard to once you get so set on something to adjust, really.
I don't even want to.
Hey, everybody, give us a second while we get, if you guys got your going on in the background, just shut her down. Hey, everybody, Sean Dotson with The Flip Side. I want to welcome you to another panel discussion. And tonight we're going to be discussing what adjustments has Forrest Fenn made in the chase and why. So tonight, I want to welcome our panel members, my good friend Decall Thomas, as always. Everybody, I think you know Crysty Fiorella, who's been on the show with us before when we discussed the Blaze. And then everybody should also know as well Todd Birmingham, who we had on last week when we talked about Todd Saul, very popular. So everybody, say hi.
Good evening.
Todd, Crysty.
Hi.
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 So this is your non-PC beer drinking, thrill of the chase talking show. So tonight I'm drinking from Ska Brewery, a beverage called True Blonde. And this is out of Durango, Colorado. So I'm going to pop a top and hopefully all of you have your beverages of choice. And I'm going to pour this. We're going to get this show started.
Nice.
So tonight we're going to discuss a few things. One of the main things, obviously, has Forrest Fenn made adjustments in the chase and why. We're going to discuss about, is Forrest Fenn really ambivalent about this treasure being found in his lifetime? And we're going to talk about how us searchers have adjusted. And is Forrest Fenn really a good puzzle maker? So I think one of the key things we really need to talk about tonight, and I'm going to throw this over to Todd because this is really what Todd was talking about in the pre-show, is that we really kind of need to create a baseline for this whole discussion. So Todd, I'm going to kind of hand this over to you and let you discuss that and put you on the spot. So
sure, I don't mind. So we were talking a little bit about this last week, and you start to look at some evidence that, I guess there's a question whether or not Forrest wants this found in his lifetime. I mean, everybody asks it, right? Because he's said different things. Such as, well, it might not be found for 100 years or 1,000, or I don't really care. He's made a lot of statements like that, but there is evidence that that's probably not true. And one of the things that we brought up last week was the mere fact that he actually published his email address where you could get a hold of him directly in the original book, in The Thrill of the Chase. So you have to ask yourself, okay, well, if the author is actually publishing his email address, and he's always made it fairly easy for anyone to get a hold of him and discuss the treasure hunt. If he was so ambivalent, why would he have done that? And why is he still, after all of these years, very engaged in the chase? I mean, even after he makes statements earlier this year on Jenny's site during the final 6 questions in February, where he said he was going to be stepping back and enjoying other things in his life, it still seems that he can't get away.
Yeah,
so
his doctor has said he's had hints from his doctor to step away, back in 2017, I think it was. But
sure.
didn't he, above and beyond his email address, I think in the first edition of the book, didn't he actually put his phone number in there too?
That's sure, but it's true.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that, but I mean, if that's the case, then I mean, because I know that he's fielded several phone calls from people over the years as well to discuss their solve. So I think I guess what's probably important to kick off this discussion, Sean, is that you want to first establish that he isn't ambivalent, that he is engaged, and that he does want to be a part of this game that he's created. And then if you can establish that fact, then you can start going into the concept that he has actually made adjustments. He's made changes over the years to shepherd searchers closer to the chest if he feels that there are the lion's share, the vast majority of people aren't even in the ballpark.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, is the kind of the cornerstone for any discussion related to, is he in fact adjusting?
Right. Well, and that's just the question. You know, is he ambivalent about this being found in his lifetime? Does he really not care? And I think you've done a good job of stating all those facts. Is that why did he put his email? Why did he put his phone number? Why is he so involved? Why do we have more books? You know, everything else we can go down that. And Decall, what were you going to say?
I almost get the feeling that it's not a deliberate negative vibe, but some people, it just seems like they're fighting against Forrest Fenn, you know, and some people are just like kind of promoted by Forrest Fenn, you know, like Cynthia might be a good example. I mean, he loves Cynthia. I mean, he loves Rick McDonald. And they're totally different states, but I think he likes certain things, and that's not an insult to anybody, but it kind of gives you the vibe. I'm just saying it's a vibe about what direction he wants things to go in.
And Quanah Parker made a statement in there that says, I think maybe he might want the treasure found because of people harassing him and his family. That could be something that maybe he didn't anticipate, that he was going to get that kind of harassment, you know, that may be something that has changed his ambivalence, if we want to call it that.
I hear, side conversations that Forrest Fenn denies that and denies that. He's denied a lot of things. He denies that it's about his legacy. He denies that there's any involvement. He denies that there's any confirmation to anybody. But at the same time, you know, he is providing his contact info. He is literally actively pursuing emails and conversation and visiting who he wants to visit with.
Picking and choosing kind of his own spokespeople, for a better lack of words.
Ramblin' Pam could call him up and say, I'll be there tomorrow. Do you want to get together? And he'll say, yeah. I'm sure he will. I mean, she's so terrific, you know.
So Crysty, what do you think?
Well, I think that, I think he originally published his information because he didn't think it would be viral. I think that he thought that the scope would be much smaller, and he said that all along. He had no idea. Every interview, he would say, oh, now 40,000 people are looking. Oh, now 100,000 people are looking. He keeps track of all that information. And I honestly don't think that he expected such a reach. And I actually think that he cares a lot about his reputation. And I think that's one of the reasons that he does stay so involved, is because he wants to, in a way, defend himself and clarify. And that's why I think that the biggest reason that he stays so involved. But he also has said that he doesn't want to really be involved anymore. He's tired of it, you know, and I think that that's probably true as well.
I would disagree, Crysty, with the part about him not thinking it was going to go viral. And the reason why I would say that is because the guy spent, 30 years in business, and, he's told several stories about how he's really does have a master's in marketing. His ability to be able to drum up a lot of interest in a particular subject. He has a long history of that. And I believe that when he originally came up with this idea, a $1 million plus treasure hidden somewhere out west is going to draw a lot of attention. And I think he knows that, and he knew that.
Mistakes or experience, like the full page ads that it seems like his first full page ad, I think he said that was his last, whatever, $1,000 or whatever he spent on it. And if that didn't work, he was going to have to do something else. That was interesting.
Yeah.
And I think his whole push at the beginning, I think, if we look, I like to personality type people. I like to type them. And I think that he is a marketer. He's a salesman. He says it himself. He's a schmoozer. He knows who to be and what to say and how to mingle with, the rich and famous. And I think that this was his way to do something remarkable. But I don't actually think that he saw the full scope of it, because he said, what if it's found in 10,000 years? And I think that he planned for it to be found much later on, which is why he included his memoir and his hair for DNA analysis. Like, I think that he planned that it could be a very long time, but he was wanting to leave his mark, not his legacy, as he always likes to fight that, but he wanted to be known that he did something remarkable.
So moving on with this, I think, like Todd has said, what we're trying to build the baseline for those of you that are watching the show is that, if Forrest Fenn is so involved and so up to date with this and all the other external stuff that's coming in, the deaths, the death threats, the people harassing him, chief of police of New Mexico sending him things to end the chase, all this other stuff. You got to be those things that are affecting the puzzle maker. So the next question we're going to move on from that is that, do we have any kind of proof that Forrest Fenn is actually a successful puzzle maker? And I'm really going to go back again to Todd about this. And this is a question that came up from Man Alone last year. Man Alone had posed this question. It says, we have no proof that he's a good puzzle maker. He's never done anything in the past. We have no baseline of him producing anything out there. So Todd, what are your thoughts on that? You do escape rooms. You have a lot of day-to-day interaction with this and building puzzles. So give us a little bit of feedback on that.
So, here's the thing. The process that I go through to come up with like an escape room concept and then the puzzles that go into it is that I just do a lot of thinking. I liken it to what Forrest has said in the past about, laying in bed in the early mornings and doing his best thinking. Right. I think he spent a lot of time, and he said this, he spent 15 years thinking about the poem, thinking about the puzzles. He saw this whole thing play out, probably in a good portion of it in his mind's eye, probably beginning in the late 80s, and probably a good portion of the decade of the 90s, just thinking about this stuff. And and he probably saw all the angles. He saw how this clue would work and how this puzzle would work, and I think that as a puzzle maker, I do that myself. And and I might think something is super clever and is going to be super easy. Just last week I had this puzzle it's based on shapes, and you have to fit shapes into kind of an outline. They're actual, you remember the color forms, the little plastic rubbery things that, we had as like in the 70s or the 80s. It's those. And you have
Crysty
to take
doesn't know any of that.
Okay. So
too young.
Anyway, color forms it's just a toy, and they're like little plastic, 2-dimensional pieces. And you have to, and there's an outline on a piece of plexiglass, and you have to put the piece in the same shape. And I thought, okay, this is going to be easy. And then I showed a couple of people, and they were like, what am I supposed to do? I don't really know what I'm doing. And it's just like, it's one of those things where you think, okay, this is just going to be dead easy.
Yeah.
And then you show other people, and they're completely in some other headspace on what they're supposed to do. So then you go back to all that thinking that Forrest did for all those years, thinking, well, this is really clever. Like the one big thing that I point to is, in the mountains north of Santa Fe. Now my opinion as a puzzle maker, I would have thought that was crazy clever to say that, because I would have been thinking, oh, everybody's going to think it's, northern New Mexico, but it's actually any of the mountains north of Santa Fe. And I think that after he published it, he thought, okay, there's going to be those handful of clever people that are going to figure out that it doesn't necessarily mean it's in New Mexico. And then he's starting to realize, gosh, people aren't getting this at all.
Yeah, they're looking right outside of Santa Fe in the mountains. Yeah,
and he didn't have to say anything at that point. He could have just let people to make those assumptions. You don't correct somebody or your competition when you think they're making a mistake. We're not necessarily his competition, unless he doesn't want us to find it.
And then you have your 1,000-year scenario, because if he would have kept with the original book, not published anything else, not said anything else, then yes, we're looking at least 100-year puzzle, probably, because it's so obtuse and vague and clever, and everything's so buried deep as far as the puzzles go. But he didn't do that. He continued to publish. He continued to say things. The mere fact that he went on the Today Show and was giving out clues of like limitations to elevation, and he was eliminating states. Right there, he's adjusting in real time. He was adjusting.
Yeah, so Utah and Idaho all in one punch.
Right. He eliminated, millions of acres. So it's like, so
why would he need to, again, that's the whole point then. Why would he need to do that if he just didn't give a rat's ass if it was found, excuse my language, but if it was found in his lifetime or not?
Yeah, I agree. It's huge.
Right, Crysty?
There's a lot of pointers.
Yeah.
I mean,
the only time a woman's going to agree with us. Yes.
One other thing I would say is that if we can say, okay, Forrest, it does want to be engaging. He wants to engage in this puzzle. Then if we can point to evidence that he's actually adjusted, I mean, literally adjusted. He's eliminated 2 states. He's narrowed the elevation. He's done all sorts of other things. Then you have to ask, and I think this is where it actually gets interesting. How far has he gone to adjust, and what has he done, and what has he said to lead one or people to the ultimate answer? And that's where it gets a little gray, because then you can start going down the rabbit hole of, looking at this scrapbook. It's just scrapbook 2.
He's talking to me. He's adjusting. He's talking to me.
Or is he constantly adjusting? Is every single scrapbook have clues? And it's just, and that's where it gets a little kooky.
Well, and I think the perfect example of that might be Too Far to Walk. Came out second. It's a hefty book. It's got Madison Junction right on the cover, and
it's not really Madison Junction according to Dale, but okay.
And it's got, and even Forrest Fenn said that's what it's intended to be. The place.
Sure. Be the Madison River, somewhere along the Madison River.
Yeah, very close to the Madison Junction. And then the preface mentions very literally the 10 miles of river between Madison Junction and Barnes Hole, Baker's Hole, whatever, Brown's Hole, I don't know what it is. So that 10 miles of river, which turns out to be 15 or 18 miles of river, doesn't matter. That to me seems like an adjustment. But that might be my own.
Is it an adjustment, or is he trying to give out a hint, or is he trying to focus us? I mean, there's focusing, then there's adjusting.
If no one wrote him about the correct warm waters halt for that whole first 2 years, sure, they're in these areas, but no one says Madison Junction is the correct warm waters halt. Just as an example, people, don't get all stressed. Okay, then it makes perfect sense that he puts out this book and says, here, let me be a little more obvious. You can associate that with any chapter in any book. Okay, he's being more obvious for your solve. Okay, but I think coming out with that second book still shows his involvement, still shows his interest. I mean, even way more than scrapbooks or anything. It's restating the essentials, I believe.
Yeah. I got a question here from William. He says, has Forrest adjusted enough to finally step back? His clues for the last year has been lacking after the gut feeling comment. Do you think he's adjusted enough to where he thinks that whoever, if we want to call it, is close or whatever, has enough information? Or do you think?
I think William's 100% right. I think William is very good at this game. I think you're nailing it on the head with the concept that he probably has said enough. I know in my years of experience with Jingle Bell Rock, you can kind of tell the more experience you have when enough clues have been given out, because it starts to get more ridiculous and more, restating. You're like, dude, I've heard this a million times. Well, it's because that enough information has been given out, and he's putting emphasis back on the important things. But
you could argue that the last real thing that he said about the actual poem was in last August, like a year ago, August or whenever it was, when he said, I've said it again, but I'll say it one more time. Warm waters halt is the first clue. And really, since then, it's been kind of more like, thanks for the memories.
Yeah.
I guess you could argue that the questions and answers to the school kids might have been something, but he really hasn't directly stated anything related to any of the poem elements since that last time he talked about warm waters halt, which lends itself to what William is saying, which is, maybe now it's enough. And now he's just kind of, he's talking about huckleberries and he's talking about wolverines and he's just kind of tossing stuff out there that's kind of mild interest, but really is not related to anything, which is to say that he's done adjusting. He's done enough.
Yeah. So let's just talk about, what do we think, what things throughout this chase do we think that Forrest Fenn has really made some adjustments? Let's look at some key things that we believe have happened that have been somewhat adjustments. And to me, one of the big ones, as Todd already hit upon, was him, narrowing it down by saying in the Rocky Mountains. That might have been of an adjustment because he thought it was a clever way, like Todd said, hey, somewhere in the mountains north of Santa Fe. And then, like Dale said, when he was on there with Rodney, you had people that were looking outside the United States because, other mountain ranges in other states theoretically were north of the mountains north of Santa Fe, and Forrest Fenn then maybe had to make an adjustment because that clever clue he thought was clever really wasn't that clever. And he had to turn around and readjust it and affirm that it was the Rocky Mountains. That could be one key thing, right?
I think safety is probably one of the most adjustments that he's made, and the most information that he's given has been because people have been doing stupid things. And so he continually has to go back and say, don't go on a mountaintop, don't go on a mine, don't go on a cliffside. So, he's narrowed that down considerably just for the fact of safety.
Okay, let's talk about that. The safety wraps around the deaths. Let's talk about the first death that we know we had within the chase, and that was Randy Bilyeu in early 2016. And even before then, we had a woman who got lost in Bandelier National Park back in 2013. Yeah. Channa Thompson, I think was her name. She got lost in Bandelier. And then Forrest Fenn made a statement, I think it was in Scrapbook 78. He said, since Bandelier National Park is on the map, it should be considered, right? And this was all in Scrapbook 78, came out shortly after the whole Channa Thompson issue. And then we had Randy Bilyeu, who got lost in 2016. I'll have to pull up, and it was an article it was a Denver article back in August 2016 that came out. Let me see if I can find it. I've got it pulled up here somewhere. And in this, Forrest Fenn said that Fiorella Canyon is not in the Rocky Mountains. Why was he looking at a place that wasn't in the designated search area? Well, Forrest Fenn, even to your own statement, you said it was because it was on the map, so to speak. So, we had a death in there. Was he also trying to make adjustments? Now he makes adjustment 4 years later or whatever, saying, hey, it's not, not in the Rocky Mountains. It's in a canyon.
Isn't there some arguments that, okay, you could start in Utah, you could start in Texas, you could start in Canada, and the clues, so the treasure's inside the map, but it's almost like you restating it makes it almost clear that all the steps in the poem are basically in those Rocky Mountain areas, clearly on the map, but
I guess at least your starting point where you're supposed to get out of your car, maybe. Now that a lot of people thinks that you've got to physically go to where warm waters halt, and within 500 feet of that location is where the treasure chest is. I'm not saying that's incorrect, but there's some people that think that. But theoretically, warm waters halt could be in Canada somewhere.
But if it's the first clue, I don't think Forrest Fenn is trying to be so clever. If he says it's the first clue, then I think he's trying to just get people to focus on how could it not be related to the first book? Of course, it doesn't have to be the places mentioned in Thrill of the Chase, but it has to be, related to the first book. The first book was everything.
We could do a whole different show on that whole thing. What we're trying to isolate here is where has he made adjustments? And I'm going down the rabbit hole Crysty kind of brought up about, safety. We had the death of Randy, and then he turned around and said, he was in an area that wasn't in the designated search area. Yet 3 years earlier, he said, it's on the map, so it must be considered. Was Randy thinking that when he went out there and, in early 2016, and lost his life? So I think the deaths have been something he's obviously had to make adjustments on.
Yeah.
I think that's I didn't really think about that before, but I think Christy's right. That probably is the single biggest adjustment. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's a life and death situation. I mean, when he starts hearing that people are, dying as a direct result of looking for the treasure, he has to come out and say something, because it's just that has bad optics if you don't. And I think he cares too. But
what has he said? Maybe not underwater. Is that one of the safety related?
I think it's one of many. I mean, the fact that he said
not in the Rio Grande, not in a mine, not in a cave, right? Not on a top of a mountain, not a steep precipice, not anywhere an 80-year-old man
large
couldn't
rocks.
go. Right.
Making a big deal about what time of year to go.
Right, that's true.
Making the whole point. I mean, the 4 deaths that we know of, and I think there's more: Jeff Murphy, Randy Bilyeu, Paris Wallace, and Eric Ashby have all been water related. And I've said this before, and this is a completely different subject, but he's never ruled out water crossing. He said the right kind of waders to wear, the kind that go way higher so they don't get flooded if you fall over, the kind that got felt, bottoms, all this other stuff. Why would he give you stuff on that and not just tell us keep your ass out of water because it's not in water? He just said it's not underwater, I mean, so stay out of the water. Don't be looking underwater, but
the waders
mean you can't cross a stream or something else. Yeah.
The waders was a very interesting addition,
Yeah.
And if I could say, as far as the safety, I do think that he set all these things saying, hey, it's not somewhere dangerous. But then I think in the last Huckleberry post, I think he's kind of coming back in and clarifying that his idea and definition of dangerous is different than mine.
Yeah.
I was actually raised in the Tetons. I spent very much like Forrest. I spent my summers in the national parks just south of Yellowstone, and I picked huckleberries and there was bears. And so, but now taking my kids to Yellowstone, it's very dangerous. At every corner, I'm like, they could die 1,000 different ways. Like I could write the book on how to die in Yellowstone. But Forrest is saying, hey, Yellowstone actually isn't that dangerous. I picked huckleberries. There were bears. I went in the forest for 3 days at a time as a kid. Like things were different then. So although we think it's dangerous, he's saying it's not dangerous, even though it is.
Buffalo story. I mean, he found himself right next to the buffalo. I mean,
right.
Buffalo smoke. Yep. Yeah. I mean, he comes from a completely different time than we did, where the parents would just, let you go. I mean, I grew up in the 80s when, we were gone all day, until it got dark and it was time to eat. And if you didn't come home when dinner was ready, well, you didn't eat, I mean, you drank from hoses and did all kinds of other crazy stuff. Nowadays, you've got all kinds of warning labels on a hose that says don't drink out of it because you could get cancer. Like, what the heck? We can't do anything these days. So it's completely different times. Now, some of the other adjustments I think he's made is the whole back in the box statement from July 1st of 2016. What was that? That was a huge, in my opinion, adjustment, and I can go back and find this and try and read it here. If I don't think I have it up here.
Well, I was asking Sean, what is in the box anyway? Can anyone tell me what's in the box? I have my idea what's in the box. I've been persecuted for what I believe is in the box, but
or what that means, not necessarily what's in the box. We're supposed to know what's in the box, right?
I
what
say
the box
what I think is in the box and what the box is. Of course, I think it's West Yellowstone. Of course, I think it's brown trout. Of course, I think it's Hebgen Lake, and but nobody wants to agree with that,
Yep. Well, this was the question we got in July 1st, 2016. And I recall this because I was coming back from a search up in the Sunlight Creek area up above Cody. It says, Mr. Fenn, I'm not even close to solving your riddle. I've tried for months and nothing works. I'm not asking for a clue to the treasure. I'm asking for a clue to the clues. Please help me. It's hilarious. It's like they're asking for a hint, and Forrest responds, Dear Ms. Mary, the solve is difficult for many searchers because their minds think the clues are tougher to decrypt than they really are. Some say they are trying to think outside the box as if the solution lies somewhere out there. Until now, I have resisted telling them to get back in the box where the thoughts are comfortable and flow more easily. The blueprint is challenging, so the treasure may be located by the one who can best adjust. To illustrate my point, go to YouTube, Smarter Every Day. So it's like he's telling it's almost like he's making an adjustment. He's like that puzzle master who's watching people go through their escape room, and he's like, oh God, you guys need to, you're way overcomplicating this, right? Is that, I mean, what are you guys getting out of that?
Well, that's exactly what he said when he said many people are overcomplicating the complexity of the search. And then he lists everything that people are emailing him with.
Scrapbook 62,
but at the same time, he contradicts himself because he says imagination is more important than knowledge. And, you know, he tells us that it's straightforward, but now he's saying, you know, he's saying get back in the box, but he told us to like use our imagination. So which is
well, he's never said imagination is more important than knowledge. He keeps quoting Einstein, I think.
And he says we're not thinking the right way. We're not thinking the right things.
Yeah. Well, and you got to ask yourself what comes first, the knowledge of how something works or the imagination to make that thing work. You know,
he told Dale he didn't have enough imagination. That's why he's not doing well on his solves, right? I mean, Dale said that himself.
Poor Dale.
If I'm wrong.
No, Dale gets beat up more than anybody.
So he wants us to use imagination, but we also need to stay in the box. But to me, that's confusing.
So do we think that this whole statement by him was an adjustment? Is my question.
I think it's direction. Same as saying we're not focusing in on the right word that's key.
Crysty, what do you think the box is? I mean, it's a legitimate question. I don't know what the box is. Todd, what's the box? I mean, Sean, I've heard Sean say what he sort of thinks it is.
The box in context of what he just in that statement. I think, I mean, like everything else that I think that that Forrest says or writes, I think it is a signal that is a description of the place. Really? So yeah, because like, you know, and I've gone over this before. I've written about it on here. He's talked about it, but it's you know, he's a master of semiotics. You know, he understands the signifier and the signified. You know, it's like we know what a stop sign is because we know that means to halt or to stop because we see it, and it's just red and the shape. He uses language all the time, I believe, to describe the place. Yeah. And I do believe that it's a place, and I think it's a place that has it has multiple meanings. So when he says get back in the box, I think it's not so much, he's not talking about like think outside of the box, because that's just too too easy.
Could be a buzzword, yeah.
And I think that what he's doing is that when you start taking not just that one statement, but if you take the whole breadth of his statements and all of the things that he's said over the years, I think a lot of the stuff he says is very, very subtle signals on how to build getting to this place. So when he says people need to get back in the box, could that not be describing the way that this end point, this place where the treasure is located? That's actually a way to describe that. I think that's my personal opinion.
I think he's being very literal. I mean, he's saying, you know, there's some people are saying that they're trying to think outside the box, and to think outside the box means to think in a different way, to try things in a different method. But he's trying to simplify us by saying, hey, you know, until this point, you know, July of 2016, I've resisted telling people to get back in the box where their thoughts are more comfortable and flow more easily. So I think he's, in a literal sense, he's telling people, man, you guys are, with your ideas, you're way outside the box. You know, you guys need to focus it in a little bit more on what's important. Now, Minotaur Marino, I had a great discussion about this, and I think we were somewhat on the agreement that it's, you know, his meaning is to basically to simplify, to get back in the book, you know, and stay with that information we had from the very beginning, you know, October 25th of 2010. As a poem purist, I really try and focus more on the poem, but he said there are also other subtle clues in the book, and we know, paraphrasing, that those can help you with the clues if you feel you need that help or whatever. But again, they're so subjective that, you know, your own mind will think that whatever this is in a writing in the book is an actual subtle hint. You just don't know. I mean, there's just so many words in that book. How do you know exactly what it is? Now, Minotaur Marino did a good job on his point of trying to, you know, prove or isolate what those are, but you won't know until you ever you find the treasure. So to me, the box is simply the thrill of the chase book, to get back in there, get back in this and stop going so far outside that thing, why is it we got outside that box? I guess is the question.
Because Forrest constantly is putting out more content.
Yeah.
We got outside the box because 350,000 people can't figure out this thing.
Or maybe some of his first advice to us back in 2011 was to read this book, then go back and read the poem 6, 8, 10 times.
Slowly.
Then go back and read the book again, slowly, looking for anything that trips up in your mind. Well, then people started finding connections, and then they started going outside of the book, looking into history and all kinds of other stuff, and finding a plethora of coincidences that gave them confidence, and they got so far outside the book. In my opinion, this is just my opinion, that he had to adjust, and he had to make the statement until now I've resisted telling those people to get back in the box, and that box could simply just be the thrill of the chase. But again, Minotaur Marino, I think, would probably agree with you, Todd, that it could be semotics. He's talking about a potential box canyon or something that we need to get in.
Yeah, and that's it, because everything that he says, I think, is he's giving. There's double meanings, and triple meanings. So just because what I'm saying is what I believe, I also, on the other hand, do believe what you're saying is true as well. Because I think that there's multiple meanings when he says things, and I think he has this wry little thing that he likes to throw something in to make you think that this is what he's intending to mean, which he might, but then is also meaning something else at the same time.
Well, yeah, you take in that one comment he said, if you don't think I could have put the treasure there, you're probably right. Well, that can mean several different things. Well, you're probably right. You're probably wrong. Are you underestimating me? You don't think I could have put it over there? Well, then you're not worthy enough to find my treasure. Then next,
I've always joked that the biggest mistake anyone could make when asking Forrest a question is to include the word "or."
Right. Don't give him an open-ended question.
Oh yeah, he will take full advantage of that word.
Yeah.
I think him pretty well, Todd. I'm pretty impressed with your perspective on Forrest Fenn lingo.
So if I could get back to the safety thing, because it just started making me think after Crysty brought that up, is talking about adjustments and safety. So 2007, the summer of 2017 was that was almost like a turning point in the chase, because it was almost like this because there was like 2 people, I think, that died that summer or around there. And that was also when the state police chief, or whoever it was, came out and asked him to stop the chase. What did he do anything that summer, that earlier in the spring, or any time in that area? Did that indirectly spur the whole gut feeling thing? Like, did he say that as a result of like thinking, okay, if I say that I have a feeling it's going to be found this summer, maybe it's going to light a fire under thousands of people to go and find it? So was that an adjustment? I guess my question is that
that backfired.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about it though, if he was thinking, okay, too many people are dying, this is getting too much negative press, they're asking me to stop it, my family's getting harassed, what can I do? What adjustments can I make to spur a winning solve? And it's like, so that's an interesting period there, like summer of 2017 to summer of 2018, that 1 year window of the things he was saying. Were there a lot of adjustments being made in that year to really act as a catalyst to get people to get out there and to find it once and for all? I mean, it's a question, I don't know, but it's an interesting area to look at and think about.
One thing that was really interesting, and Decall and I were talking about this earlier today, is that spring between March 30th and April 17th, we had a rush of 12 scrapbooks.
Of 2018 or 2017?
No, this is early 2017. This was
Okay.
March into April of 2017. We had a rush of like 12 scrapbooks. It went from like scrapbook 168 or 169 all the way to 180.
Yeah.
And 180 was a very interesting scrapbook. This was, if a lot of people probably won't remember this, but it was the unfortunate hiccup. That was the one, and that's what it was titled. And it was all about this guy that was drinking at the open tournament back in Texas or somewhere, and it was Sam Snead or somebody was making this putt, and this guy hiccup and caused him to miss the shot. But what was so interesting about that is it's 180 is like to turn around.
Yeah, I love it.
And it was an unfortunate hiccup. So what did somebody in the search community make an unfortunate hiccup, and he was trying to redirect them? And why that's so interesting is that never in the chase that I can recall, at least for me being in it, did we ever have a rush of 12 scrapbooks in a period of 2 weeks.
Yeah,
it was like he had this rush to get to scrapbook 180 for some reason. Like he wanted to hurry up and get this out there before the search season started. He wanted to maybe make a point to someone in the community or something that they needed to turn around. They needed to go back. They needed to change their plan or something because they made an unfortunate mistake. And that was just something you're talking about, things that happened in 2017, and then we had 3 or 4 deaths that summer. We had Eric, Paris, and Jeff. And there might be another one I may be missing, but
hiccup,
that's one thing that stands out to me.
That's a good analogy, man. 180-degree hiccup. I mean, kind of like, something's causing a problem. Yeah, I like it. Something
happened.
Yeah, and then you always bring up that the idea that he said you could probably find it in any weather or something like that. Didn't you always say that was kind of a instigator or
well, it could have been an instigator for Randy. And that was said in December of 2015, just prior to Randy going out and searching, where he had said, if you know exactly where it is, you could probably retrieve it at any weather. Was that something that spurred Randy on, and the fact that he hadn't negated, Frijoles Canyon or Bandelier National Park? I mean, the interesting thing about Bandelier National Park is the elevation differences from 5,000 to 10,200 in the park.
Yeah. Wow.
And those are the elevation ranges that he gave us. So, I mean, for somebody, like a Randy or any other searchers out there, I mean, I looked at Bandelier too. I mean, that stood out to me, before I refocused and readjusted my own self, that it did fall within those areas. It was close to Santa Fe.
There's a lot of coincidences out there. They boggle the mind all day long, like how that fits so well,
Yep. Well, another thing we talked about too is the revision of Once Upon a While. Was that an adjustment?
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go. My 10 o'clock is here for the escape room. Okay. So it was a pleasure talking to all of you guys. Have a great night, and hopefully I'll be able to be on again soon.
Yep, we'll catch you, Todd.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Bye-bye. We'll see you. Hey, if you can get back in, jump in later. All right, buddy. We'll see you. So, I mean, we've got the revised edition of Once Upon a While. Was that an adjustment? And what is the difference between, what he put out in November of 2017 to what we have now?
Well,
what exactly was the revision? There
was several different, and I'm going to get some props to Toby Eunice, because when they did the live book signing event in 2017, Toby asked a really good question, and that question was, how did Forrest Fenn pick the 39 scrapbooks to put in there? And I can't remember everything, but one of the important things Forrest Fenn said in there is there was originally 40 scrapbooks that he had, intended on putting out there, but he left one out that talked about his writing style. Mm-hmm. And if you can point out any scrapbook that talks about his writing style, it was scrapbook 179, called To Heck with Those Guys, which was him talking about, I can't remember the guy's name, who was another writer, and how their writing styles were completely different. He says one was on the Technicolor side of the spectrum, and his is more on the black and white.
Right.
I mean, kind of straightforward. And the other one was more colorful. But he left that one out, which I thought was interesting. So now we get this revision in 2018 where he puts in scrapbook 188, which we all know is the Dizzy Dean story. But what's the connection between those two stories is both of them talk about his writing style.
I think Toby also, didn't they have a show based on all the changes between the two books?
That was actually Jason and Illinois Ghost. They did a really good show where both of them had the books and they went through each of the changes, and you guys can find it if I remember. I'll make a note of it to put that.
Sorry, Rick. Yeah, that was a great show, and
I'll put that link in the description below for you guys.
Well, the one, I mean, I emailed Forrest and said, Forrest, there's no double omega. I saw the video clips from the printer, and there's no double omega. What are you going to do? Put some stickers in the back and or reprint it or what?
Yeah.
And then so he emails me specifically, and he says it wasn't necessary or something. But then wham bam comes the revised edition, and it's got a single omega, almost like he's poking at me.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it wasn't necessary, but the revised.
He only gives you one. He didn't give you two of them. He's like, okay, Decall, I'll give you what you want, but not all of it.
What the hell?
Yeah, one thing I wondered about that was that, Doug Preston said, there are vital hints in this book. And I'm like, how does he know that?
Yeah.
Did Forrest say there's hints in this book, or like, how is he privy to that information?
Yes, and then even if he assumes that there's big information there, Forrest Fenn basically endorses that by publishing that. He could have said, no, change that. I can't live with that. No, he allowed it to be printed.
What did he allow to be printed?
Well, okay. I mean, he could have said, listen, there's no major awesome.
No, that was never in the book.
This was during an interview that Doug Preston said, Forrest told me not to say, but I'm going to say it. There are vital hints in this book.
Yeah.
I thought he wrote that in the preface. Okay, I'm sorry.
But the interesting thing that he did say in the foreword is that maybe it wasn't in this foreword, or maybe I'm hearing it from somewhere else, where he did say something when he saw the original version of the poem. He thought it was way too simple, but Forrest Fenn had assured him that it wouldn't be, and he wouldn't be surprised if it took 900 years for somebody to find this thing, And I thought that was interesting. But Crysty makes a very good point. What makes Douglas believe that there are hints and stuff in that Once Upon a While book? And we're not talking about the revised edition. We're talking about the original one. Well, if Douglas is a guy who saw the original version of the poem, and Douglas is a writer, there's probably things that he picks up in there. Being a close friend of Forrest and everything else, and he saw the original version of the poem, he thought it was too easy. He may look at that thing and go, oh, I can see what he's trying to say here in this scrapbook or that scrapbook. Because all it is just a bunch of scrapbooks, right? It's not new stories. It's stuff we've already heard. So, Douglas can pick out of those 39 stories and say, oh, well, but Douglas doesn't know where it is for certain. He probably has his ideas as well. So he's just like the rest of us searchers.
That's a bold statement, though, to say there's a vital clue, and Forrest didn't argue it. So somebody knows something.
Well, he had said, after Doug had said that, he says, what are you talking about, this book? And Douglas said, yeah. And Forrest rolls his head back and looks up like, oh, you dummy, I told you not to say that,
He did say something like, I told you not to say that.
Yeah. Just his body language is like, oh, Doug, you're killing me, buddy. What are you doing here? So I think the advice is one thing that I think is really key. That I think is he's adjusted over time, and I think that advice is because I think some of his original advice really took us so far outside that box. Outside the book and researching history and all their stuff that's not in there. And why those things are fun to go down those rabbit holes and learn stuff, it may not have any bearing on our ability to find the correct starting point in the treasure chest. So I think he was trying to refocus us, and his advice, in my opinion, has really changed over the years. And I know I did a video not too long ago about how his advice back in 2011, 2013, and up to 2017 was all about, book and poem, everything all together. Even, get back in the box statement, you could say, is still get back in the book. book and poem stuff. But then in 2000, late 2017, early 2018, it really kind of focused more on simplify, get back in the box, and focus on what's important, and stop getting so far outside the book. It seemed like he was trying to refocus that whole, 2017 6 questions where Jenny had asked him, how can these new searchers after 7 years have a chance at finding this? And he said, well, hey, and I paraphrase this, fresh eyes are probably what this thing needs. The longer one thinks about this, the more they complicate that. I would advise new searchers to look for the clues in my poem and try to marry them to a location on a map. He doesn't say anything about the book. There's nothing like, hey, I advise new searchers to get my book, stay in the box, and focus on that. It was, focus on the poem and marry that to a location on the map. Because if his best advice is to look at the book and everything in there and trying to find these hints, wouldn't he have restated that? I mean, this is his most recent advice in 2017. Then 2018, he turns around and says, try to simplify if you can, because we're all over. How are we overcomplicating this? That's the big $1 million question, right?
I think it's interesting that you value the book. I know, of course, you value. Of
course, I value the book.
I mean, yes, of course, and I'm not shocked at all. But I mean, I value the book in a different way than you. I interpret what's in the box a totally different way than you, and like I really think like my solve is very close to the top picture on the cover of Thrill the Chase. I mean, it's very close to there. I think that's playing the game correctly. I think that's following, staying in the box basically. Right. Is going to those places and seeing what he saw as a kid and enjoying it, but also looking how do those places fit the clues. Maybe not literally, but I certainly think literal is a lot closer to home for Forrest Fenn, a lot more simple, a lot less subterfuge that he talks about. Just a very straightforward idea of go.
But what I think you've done with that information, you've been perfectly open about this, Decall, is that what you've done with that information, we're talking about the front cover here, and you're talking about this picture here, which is overlooking trail. What'd you say?
205.
205. Sorry, I was going to say 105, but yeah, you're overlooking trail 205. Now you deem that as important information or a subtle hint or something to that. So what you've done is you've done a lot of research into looking to that location. And in my opinion, and you're my friend, and I know you won't take offense to this,
no, I won't.
What I think you've done is you've taken that subjective information, that planted image, and you've built an entire solve around that and taken your interpretation of that and then taken the clues and almost kind of force fit them around that. And you may be completely right. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just look at it from an outside perspective. I look at that. You've taken that subjective information. You've built an entire solve around it.
Well, let me restate it a little bit, because I said to myself, after I read the first book and after I read the second book, I said, I'm going to go see the places that he's talking about.
Yeah.
No bias, just go see them. And then because I was wondering, should I stop in New Mexico first or West Yellowstone? A lot of people make the same kind of decision. And I'm like, well, if it feels like my interpretation of the book is go to West Yellowstone, okay, let's go to West Yellowstone. Let's look at it. Let's just see it.
Yeah.
Okay. But then it's so striking. And a lot of people talk about this, like Cynthia and others, and Dale even, once you kind of get this vibe over there, I think K-Pro has said similar things, that the vibe for them has all changed by going there. And you've been there, but you're a tiny bit anti-West Yellowstone, if I might say. But I think that you just take what Fenn is giving you. That's being in the box, okay? And of course, I didn't force fit that. I just said, well, how do we solve? Where's a good warm waters halt? Well, the obvious one is on the cover of Too Far to Walk. It's Madison Junction. That's the most obvious candidate, and we followed the logic from there.
Based on that region, based on his affinity for that region, based on the imagery on the book. So it's like, you've picked the region, and now from that point, you're trying to pick the most obvious warm water salt, which in that area would be Madison Junction. I would agree upon that.
I think Too Far to Walk was one of those adjustments. I don't think enough people were clarifying the right warm water salt. Sure, that's subjective. Sure, that's my opinion. But I think Too Far to Walk was an adjustment.
Right.
I think that's keeping people on track.
I have something to say. So one question that I have is that he said repeatedly that the clues aren't in the book, that there's only hints to how to answer the clues. Yeah. So I have a hard time thinking, I mean, at first, like you said, I went to West Yellowstone. I followed in his footsteps. I did all those things thinking it's obviously one of these places.
Yeah.
But now I'm moving away from that I don't think it is one of the places that he's mentioned, like, because he said that the clues are not in the book, only the hints to solve the clues. So I actually am personally of the belief that he doesn't mention the actual clues in the poem, like in the book. They're, the
locations.
Right.
And he said something similar to that, Crysty, when someone had asked him, do the hints in some way give you the correct where warm water's hauled or Homer Brown or what the blaze is? Right. And he turned around and said, no, sorry, I don't, or I haven't. Right. To that point, I know I'm completely
because I had a list of every
that.
place, every person from the book, and I'm really coming away from that, saying I think I could actually mark all of these off that it's not these,
So
and maybe it's nearby, but I don't think the actual location names are in the book.
Yeah. So if the hints don't help you out with determining what those places are, what do the hints do? If they're supposed to just help us with the clues, that's, I guess, the big question.
They help you solve
how do they
clues.
help? Yeah. How do they help you solve the clues?
Well, let's talk. I mean, warm water salt, like I have interest in warm water salt that I think is a metaphor of, bathtub, a sink, a teapot. And there's lots of places named those things. And he talks about bathtubs. He talks about the temperature of water in his book being related to in his bathtub, in the fire hole. And then he talks about the tea kettle with Olga, and he talks about the bathtub with Olga. I think warm water salt is actually a metaphor, Yeah.
And it could be.
But
and if he said there's many places in the Rocky Mountains where warm water is hauled, and nearly all of them are north of Santa Fe, how do you isolate that individual one?
I think that's the big question. And I think that's why this poem is so hard to solve, is because it is simple to Forrest, because it's in a specific location. And if you know exactly where warm water's halt, you follow the clues. But how do we find out exactly where that place is?
Like this is a good example. Water is a word in the poem, but a lot, like maybe 30% of the people solving this have solutions with no water in them. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of surprising to me that they don't have the places in the book and they don't have water even. And that's understandable. That's fine. Like people, they, instead of taking it in the canyon down, they think you got to go south. Okay. I mean, I think you're going to do one clever thing after another, like an infinite series of clever moves to solve the poem. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's best to pursue it in a very very literal fashion. Take it in the canyon down, not far, but too far to walk. Follow the instructions as written, and then do some creative thinking later. But at least attempt to follow the instructions as given.
And what do we think those instructions are in the poem? I think most people would agree that probably the first stanzas 2 and 3 are really the directional instructions. So where does that creative thinking happening? Is that creative thinking happening once we are boots on the ground in the correct general area? Like you said, rocking chair ideas, those ideas that we do at home can lead us to the first few clues, but a physical presence is needed to complete the solve. So are the rest of the clues, those clues, 6 clues, I guess, would those be the ones, like you're saying, Decall, that we need to do that creative thinking once we're on the ground in the correct area? Again, those decoded words that came out of Jenny's book, if you're in the right spot, something that you probably haven't thought of should be obvious to you now. Is that where that creative thinking comes into play? If you're in the right spot, is that where,
at some point,
like Christy's saying, imagination is more important than knowledge? It takes the knowledge to get you to the correct area. Then from there, once you're in the correct area, then your imagination comes into play, that creative thinking.
I think at some point you just got to pick a spot or a half a dozen spots.
Well, then
just
you're guessing.
Oh, come on now. You have to like, how else would you get off the couch? I mean, you have to pick something.
But you have to pick the place where the clues marry the map. And that's, and I think that's
if you don't have the correct starting point, you might as well stay home and play canasta. I mean, there's a lot of people that are out there, going out through the Rocky Mountains and having wonderful vacations, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if they're out there seriously trying to find a treasure, they really better have that starting point nailed down. And there's some people that, because of geography, they're blessed to be able to go out there and search more often. There's some people, because of where they live, just can't go out there and search as often. It's just a matter of geography, So
lucky for you, you live in a treasure state, but it's
one of the treasure states. Yeah, right.
Wrong state.
We don't know. I'm in the state of confusion. So
I'm 12-hour drive from my solve. Yeah, it's but
right.
Yeah, I have kids in Salt Lake, and grandkids in Salt Lake, halfway there to my solve. So 6-hour drive from Vegas. I love it.
Yeah.
I love these little trips to Montana. I can't convince my wife to go. Certainly not this year anymore. I went twice. I'm at my limit this year.
So here's one thing to talk, and we're going to circle back to this whole adjustment thing. One of the biggest questions that Forrest Fenn is always correcting or talking about is whether the treasure chest is buried or not. And he's always said, I've never said the treasure chest is buried. Doesn't mean it's not. I just didn't want to give that as a clue. Do you think he's made some adjustments on whether that is buried or not? Or that he physically buried it, or that it is buried?
I listened in the past 3 days. I've listened to pretty much every interview, and you're right. He brings it up repeatedly and has always brought it up and corrects people every time they say it.
And he talks about it in detail a lot, like not sepulcher, not this, not that,
sure,
or however he says that long series of synonyms to buried.
So after listening to everything, I think this is the first time that I've ever thought maybe it is buried, and if it is buried, I'm really screwed.
Well, and he has slipped the tongue and said it. He has said it's buried. Okay, he has said that at least 2 or 3 times. Now, and he also has agreed with people another 3 or 4 times when they've said it's buried. But we're not sure if he's just trying to get to the next point and just casually confirming. I don't really believe it's buried. I think it is a very interesting concept that he makes a big deal out of it. And I also think that if he wanted to walk away from this game, the best way to do it is bury it 2 feet deep or 3 feet deep or 6 feet deep. That would end all his involvement in the game permanently. And if you don't figure out the poem, you'll never stumble across that thing.
Right.
I mean, 6 feet deep or 3 feet deep, it would be impossible to find that thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of the difference between the bells and the treasure.
Yeah.
Where the bells, he intentionally, and he's admitted to them being buried 3 feet deep so the metal detector can't even find them. And he said somebody is going to stumble upon those things in 1,000 years from now. And when they do, I'm going to know it when they ring that bell, and my autobiography is in some of those jars and stuff he's buried. Where the treasure chest is not meant to be stumbled upon. It's not meant to be accidentally found, even though he assures us no one's going to accidentally stumble upon it. That they're going to have to figure out the clues and go right to it. So it almost seems like there is a difference. But, and I think it was Tom Sawyer said in here, he said, he's never said you're going to need a shovel. He's never said anything about, when questioned, is there any kind of tools or anything you need? And I don't know that quote off the top of my head.
It was, do you need a pickaxe? He said, no, I don't think you're going to need any of those things.
Yeah. Well, sorry, Dale, you can put your pickaxe back in Ezzy now. But here's a interesting thing. When those coded words that came out of Jenny's book that says, if you're in the right spot, something you probably haven't thought of should be obvious. Could that obvious thing being that the treasure's buried? if there's many people out there who think that the blaze marks the treasure's location. If you're standing at what you think is Forrest Fenn's blaze, whether a mark on a tree, a mark on a rock, a big boulder, I know we had this whole discussion about it, and you're looking down and it's the ground, would that be the obvious thing that, oh, I'm going to have to dig a hole? Could that be? I'm just throwing it out there.
A lot of people are at that point. I remember Milan, finding those spectacular, blazes on trees. I mean, they were fantastic.
Sure.
And you might think immediately, I got to dig down below these blazes on the tree. And I think he did dig a considerable hole there.
No, Scott Conway dug a
No. Milan also did some digging.
He's in here. Milan's in here somewhere, I think.
Hey, Milan, we're work friends. I don't think he's going to take that personally. Yeah. No. Scott Conway did some digging too, but
I actually don't think it's buried. I think if it's buried, we're in trouble. Yeah. But I think that it's hidden creatively because of the location. The location is somewhere that, nobody goes, no one knows where it's at. So it's something creative and unique enough that he can put a treasure somewhere that nobody's going to accidentally walk by it. But he said if you're within 12 feet, you'd know it. So you're not going to be within 12 feet of a buried treasure and know that you're there.
Well, Tom Sawyer's making a good point, and I want to hit that before we go on there. I'm going to hit on your 12-foot mark too. Tom Sawyer said you're not, Forrest Fenn has confirmed, and this was in that whole safety thing in 2017 after we lost Paris and Eric, that he said you're not going to have to move any large rocks. That doesn't mean, large is all relative. It's all subjective. What Crysty thinks is a large rock and what Decall thinks and what I think is a large rock could all be different.
I can lift a large rock.
No, I'm not saying you can, but I'm saying it's all different. Right. You might think a large rock is 40 pounds and Decall might think he's a welder. I know this is wrong, but he might think it's 10 pounds. I might think it's 20 pounds. It's all completely subjective. But that doesn't mean, and like Tom Sawyer was saying in here, that you won't have to move any small rocks. Mm-hmm. Well, again, small is subjective. Small to Decall is 10 pounds and small to you might be 40 pounds. I mean, it's completely subjective. But then that circles around to you mentioning in scrapbook, I think it was 78, where he had said, I've never said that anyone was within 12 feet of the treasure. It's highly unlikely anyone would get that close and not find it. That always led me to believe, every time I'm out there searching and in my spot, I think to myself, shit, Sean, all you got to do is get within 12 feet of this thing to have a chance of finding it. That 200-foot guy, girl, whatever, was 200 foot. I just need to get 188 feet closer. Mm-hmm. If I can get within 12 feet of this thing, I have a very legitimate shot of finding this thing. So now 2018 rolls around, and I'm like thinking to myself, I need to ask Forrest Fenn for an update on this.
Yeah.
So I sent Forrest Fenn an email and said, Forrest Fenn, you said this, in 2014. Do you care to give us an update 4 years later? Forrest Fenn said, better not answer that question, Sean. Sorry. What are we to take of that? Does he not know? Like he said in the Lure interview, and Decall was hinting at this, when asked, are you burying things? And Forrest Fenn went on this whole thing about, I never said the treasure chest is buried. Doesn't mean it's not buried. Maybe we ought to define the terms. Does buried mean sepultured, entombed, blah, 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 whatever else? What if some weeds blew in there and covered it up? Is it buried? Is it sepultured? Is it entombed? So let's say back in 2014, he still believed that thing, or the small rocks that could be covering it, Tom Sawyer, were easily found. You could get within 12 feet of it and go, oh, that's kind of awkward. Maybe I ought to go check out this cairn of rocks in my search area. Now, 4 years later, some weeds blew in there and made it look like a big bush. Weeds are growing out of it, everything else. Now, Forrest Fenn, 4 years later, is like, I better not answer that question, Sean, because he doesn't know. He hasn't been back there.
I bring it up.
An adjustment, right? Is that not an adjustment?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an adjustment. It's also a little bit of a contradiction, which you could do a whole nother show on.
Yeah.
The things that Forrest had said and then said differently later on.
That'd be like we would rival probably the marathon that K-Pro and Calazars do. Yeah. If we talked about all the contradictions.
I think there has been YouTube shows.
I haven't seen it. I should watch it actually. So
well,
I want to say Shannon has done one on that.
Yeah, somebody
has. Anyone talked about how he says you don't need to look up any words, but that he loves looking up the definition of words.
I think he said something about when somebody was questioning about a Spanish to English dictionary. And then he turned around and said, you don't have to look up. You don't have to look up any words, even though, yeah, you're right.
Then he says, I love to look up the meaning of words. Well, which is it? Do we just not look up Spanish words or any words?
I'm beginning to think he went senile back in 2011. Like sometimes.
Hey, isn't he an expert at crossword puzzles? I mean, that might.
Yeah, is he? I need to know that.
I think so. I believe so.
I believe he would be probably pretty good. I mean, he's a wordsmith.
I know this show isn't about this, but I just came upon the interview today where he said that the guy who had the code word had gotten some of it correct. Maybe.
The
code. You guys know what I'm talking about?
I think he was coerced. That was starts with. That was
It was about Andrew somebody.
Yeah, Andrew.
I won't get into all that, but I found it fascinating and confusing. You don't?
No, if you watch that whole interview or listen to that whole interview, I think it was the radio interview. The guy was pushing and pushing and pushing, and then he's questioning, does this guy have it right? This whatever his name, Andrew.
Andrew Briggs. Andrew Briggs is who you're talking about. Yeah, he said he had said, that guy got some of it right.
But
maybe
he was. Yeah, but
he says maybe in there. Like he totally says.
He says you're getting close. What?
No, that was total baloney. The radio host was pushing Fenn in a way that kind of forced him to kind of like.
It reminds me of that whole radio interview where somebody reads the second stanza and says, "Well, that sounds like a couple clues there," and Forrest Fenn says, "Sounds like 3 or 4 to me."
Yeah.
And then everybody reads that and they're like, see, the 9 sentences cannot be the 9 clues because there's 3 or 4 in the second stanza. And you're like, oh my God.
Or the lady who says, I figured out all the mathematics of all this stuff and we got to dig a hole in Hebgen Lake down this far. And he's like, well, you figured it out. Like, and I'm like,
here's a woman who's done the math. She knows where the treasure is what he said.
I'm like, is he actually nodding that this is correct? Like that it's actually Hebgen Lake?
Yeah.
Oh, he's told stuff to Steph.
Hey, it must be a geothermal feature because Scott Conway and K-Pro need to go dip their toe in the water. I mean, did they?
Conway, I think he was saying.
Uh-oh, here goes the call.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. You're back. You said something. Scott Conway said.
Oh, he was saying that Forrest Fenn agreed with him. A lot of people have said that Forrest Fenn has agreed with their solve, with their ideas, with their email,
except you're just the one that says I just want Forrest Fenn to disagree with it, so I can.
Please.
I mean, you're one of the rational few out there, man.
Put me out of my misery. Thank you.
So I look at this and I go, and Milan Finner had said in here earlier, so I did say he was in here. He did say Forrest Fenn is a genius. And I think, Milan, we don't know he's a genius. I mean, when this thing is found and whoever comes out with the solve and produces it and says, this is what it was, and Forrest Fenn blesses it off, and says, yes, that was a correct solve, we don't know that he's a genius. We like to think he's a genius and we can conjecture all about it. But again, we don't know if he's a good puzzle maker. We have no proof of that. That's one of the points we're trying to make in this whole show is that we have no proof he's even a good puzzle maker. Because nobody's found it and come out and said, or there's no confirmations that anybody has actually, well, he said people have solved the first couple of clues, but again, they didn't know it. If he would have come out and said, okay, Decall solved the first 2 clues, he's right, it's Madison Junction. Okay. Would you call that genius or would you just call that, well, it was obvious, right? And I think we did lose Decall again. Crysty, there he is. He's back.
Well, and he didn't say that they didn't know that they had solved the first 2 clues. He said they walked right past it and they were within 200 feet and didn't know it. Yeah. But they don't know that they had the first 2 clues correct. But
exactly.
I think they answered the clues correctly, just to clarify that. Yeah.
Wow, Crysty can restate quotes, and so can Sean Dodson. Wow.
Getting rivalry.
I stumble around, I could barely. I remember.
Yeah, because you're up in Montana, stumbling all around. What are you doing?
I just real quick to call. I have a funny story. I was in Red Canyon, and my daughter and I was like, I had both bear sprays out, right? Because it's a little creepy going down those trails with my 3 kids and the grizzlies. So I have like both bear sprays like trigger ready. And my 8-year-old daughter comes up behind me and like she's like, and she growls behind me, and I just like lost it. I could not believe that she faked a bear attack in Red Canyon. So you might appreciate that.
Wow, I like her style. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Karen R said in here something interesting about the whole Once Upon a While interview, and I'll just, where'd it go? Uh-oh, Karen, did you delete your own comment? You must have. Now I can't find it. Yep, it's gone. Yeah, she retracted her message. Karen, evil. You don't do that. But I remember what you said, Karen. Karen had said something about Forrest Fenn in the Once Upon a While interview from November 2nd of 2017 had said, we all need intersections. That we all need some kind of intersection. Now I lost where she said after that, but she was talking about that whole point. And this is towards the end of the interview where Forrest Fenn said, we all need, an intersection. Gosh, dang it, Karen. Tell me what you were saying again. It was
bad, Karen.
Got it. Yep. I'm going to block. And Davio, why do you guys retract your messages? Everybody retracts stuff. It's funny. I don't have any keywords in here that says you can't say a certain word in here, and it retracts it. I have no moderators.
No, it's like they have their secrets, and they're willing to divulge them, but they don't want it in the permanent record.
Right.
And so their valuable gems of information are carefully sealed away forever.
Right. Jan Schultz 174 says message not retracted. What's your message then, Jan? And I haven't even said hi to anybody in the chat room. There's people who are just chatting away and talking in here. But there's been, I know, several things I haven't seen of you guys. But I think there has been, in my opinion, I think that, Forrest Fenn, although he says he's ambivalent about this thing being found in his lifetime, I really personally believe that he does want it found in his lifetime. And there could be several reasons for that, but I think from the beginning,
is it more of a gut feeling?
Sure.
Or kind of like,
no, it is a gut feeling because it's based on no evidence or proof or anything of that. So sure, it is a gut feeling.
Like you could tell when your spouse is mad. You could tell when one of your kids is sad or down. Okay, you could tell when Forrest Fenn is building a legacy here. You can tell when he's excited about a place and wants to tell you about it. You could tell when he's interested in the game. I think these are all common sort of human traits that we can see clearly. We feel them. I love the concept of micro expressions and reading people's body language. I love all that. Is very real, very helpful in business negotiating or on your first date. If you see a look of disgust on your first date, just
move on.
That's a perfect time for you to freeze.
Yeah. It's got the best internet in Vegas.
I actually figured out the problem, guys. It's this cable right here that I'm going to run directly from my router to my.
You've got a 500-foot cable.
It's 50. It's
okay.
Yeah.
So
that's a problem I had to call. It was the same problem I had. I had to run just a 20-foot, Ethernet cable to my router, and it fixed it.
Sean, so I'll I think that it's really in his family's benefit for it to be found.
Sure.
I mean, he can't protect them and keep them safe once he's gone.
That's a great point.
People.
That is a great point.
I think it really is in his benefit for it to be found.
Yeah, because what happens? We talked about. Can't remember what we were talking about, but a lot of people were trying to. Oh no, I remember I was having a conversation with some good friends up in Pagosa, who I want to give a shout out to Sarah and Brad, who bought me this shirt from Riff Raff Brewery in Pagosa Springs. Oh, Decall will be back, and we're sitting down there having a conversation with them about who is going to carry the torch after the chase is over, or Forrest Fenn passes, I should say. And they were assured that they were thinking, Shiloh or somebody should. And I somewhat agree with, somebody that can kind of, carry on the books and make sure those are out and everything else. But Shiloh, or in my opinion, or anybody else close to him, knows for certain where this treasure chest is, and is not going to be able to give out scrapbooks and hints and anything else like that. When Forrest Fenn passes, that information flow, that connection is done. We're not going to get any more of that.
Well, he did say that someone asked him specifically, he said if he told anyone it would be Shiloh, and that it is something that he's thinking about. We don't know what decision he's going to make, but it's something on his mind for sure.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think that he doesn't want to, I hate to call it a burden, but it is somewhat, it has become a burden over the years of, and I'm not just talking about the 100 emails he gets a day. I'm talking about the people breaking into his home, the negative press about people losing their lives. I mean, how many people, we don't even know how many people have lost their lives just driving to their searching location.
Sure.
What are you're going to blame that on Forrest because somebody got in a car accident?
Well, there's a guy, there's a lesser known story of a guy who was coming home from searching, literally. Mm-hmm. He was climbing on a silo and fell off a silo and is dead. And the mother was blaming Forrest Fenn. That's how I saw the news article, because he felt the kid fell off a silo.
Well, let's talk about Iron Will. Iron Will got in an accident, driving home from Fenbury.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Luckily he didn't get hurt. He did some damage to his car. Iron, I know you're in the room, you're floating around here somewhere. If something would have happened to Iron, and I'm not saying that, would Iron Will's family hold Fenn accountable or blame the chase because he lost his life driving back?
But like Forrest Fenn says, Grand Canyon has its 40 accidents or 20 deaths a year, whatever the number is. Right. And Illinois Ghost, Rick's probably got some great stories driving his 100 trips from, Chicago to New Mexico.
Sure.
Well, I think you're right. I think there's probably actually more people that have died. If you look at everyone that's gone missing or passed away, falling off a cliff, the people that we just don't know about, or they didn't have family that knew what they were doing. Lost Dutchman's Gold. Over 100 people have died looking for that. That's right up here by me,
Like Bill Gorman says in here, if you die doing stupid things, it's your own fault. And Forrest Fenn said that exact same thing in the Playboy interview when he was saying, hey, we had somebody that was looking in Yellowstone in the middle of wintertime. If you die out there, that's your own dang fault, or something along that lines in the Playboy interview. Again, if you're doing stupid things and not adhering to some of his so-called rules, don't go where an 80-year-old guy couldn't go, and stay out of the mountains in the wintertime when there's snow and everything else, then, you're not listening to the so-called guidelines or rules of the chase. And those are adjustments he's had to make. Mm-hmm. He didn't come out right away in the book and say, hey, don't go where an 80-year-old guy couldn't go. That was inferred. It was inferred in the book because when he hid the treasure chest, he said he was 79 or 80. So it should be easily inferred that you shouldn't be going where a 79 or 80-year-old guy wouldn't have gone to hide a treasure chest. That's easily inferred. But because we're all a bunch of stupid humans who drop hot coffee on their lap and have to have warning labels on every damn thing out there, then Forrest Fenn's got to adjust and put warning labels for us Darwin Award winners out there, Sorry, that's my rant. I'll shut up now.
Yeah.
Awkward.
It's funny because I still have a lot to talk about, but I don't like stealing the conversation from.
No, jump in.
If there's a 1 minute dead silence, now's your chance.
Now's your chance. You got to jump in.
Now's my chance. Well, what I was trying to say is my brother told me that the internet, even though I have the best internet money can buy here, I have to, what I have to do is get rid of all the splitters between the cable coming into my house. And,
oh, yeah.
And I didn't realize, I've got all these splitter connections on my cable coming up to my main router. And that's what the problem is, though.
You can talk to my husband if you need. He does IT. He can help you.
I'm almost positive it's the best next step. The one thing I wanted to bring up earlier was if talking about it being buried, I think that woman in the floor illustration in
Too Far to Walk.
Far to Walk.
Yep.
Gosh, phone. Who the hell's calling? That runs.
That was your IT department.
I'm running this show tonight. So the woman in the floor. I mean, that's a very good example of how it's concealed. That lid
could be concealed. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, because like I've said it before, I've never seen an example of square pottery. So Forrest Fenn is depicting some square pottery with that, with the dragonfly symbol, the Native American dragonfly symbol, and I've never seen any of that on pottery. I've never seen square pottery in all of Arizona. All the years I've been to Arizona, my family's all from Arizona. I think it's basically symbolic of the treasure being concealed properly under the floor, which is not extremely deep, which also fits, like William or somebody was saying about the metal detector. If it works in the right spot, if you're right over it, right above the treasure, then a metal detector should work.
That's pretty obvious.
That's 24 inches or less.
Yeah.
And so, and then this whole thing of weeds blowing in. Why would weeds blowing in matter if it's not basically
exposed?
6 inches under or 8 inches underground or less.
The only problem with that is if we think it's some kind of a Terry scant, if you want to call it, marking the treasure's location, and it's written on there, if you should ever think of me when I pass this veil, smile at a homely girl, or whatever the whole quote is that's on there. And then we lift that lid and there's the treasure chest. What if there's a cairn or rocks or something over that? Or is Forrest Fenn implying that we should all go out there and knock over every cairn or rocks that ancients have put out, in the Rocky Mountains? No, I don't think he's implying that we shouldn't be doing those types of things. So it's just, again, that's what I think is why his statement to me about the update on the 12 foot is so hard to understand. In 2014, if he said it, if you can get within 12 feet of it, you have a high chance of finding it. Now he wants to turn around and say he doesn't want to give an update, or he doesn't want to answer that question.
Well, and I'm glad you never quote it wrong. It's not see the chest within 12 feet. It's find the chest within 12 feet. So, and he's made a big deal that it is concealed. I think there's some interesting symbolism about buried. I mean, why would he make a big deal about buried? And he's got all these tombstone, all these grave symbolisms in his book. He wants to die and leave his bones there. There's definitely a death sort of theme going here. We don't know how strong that theme is or how important that theme is, but buried is probably part of the concept, just like water is part of the concept. A water crossing, some kind of burial.
Huli's making an interesting point in here, and I'd have to double check this, but she says at the flip side, NUA, Northern Arizona University, it should be, in Flagstaff and the Divern parking lot at the museum, do they have underground parking spots? Is that one thing maybe he was trying to hint at with those two statements? And those two statements didn't come from Forrest; those came via Douglas Preston. Was Douglas Preston, kind of like Crysty was talking about, why would he say there's a hint in this book, if he wasn't privy to some previous information that he got from the original version of the poem, that maybe it is buried? Again, some people believe that one of the original versions of the poem says, look down beyond the stones, take the chest, but leave my bones. So beyond the stones, meaning underneath some small stones, not large rocks, right? Tom Sawyer, you're saying? Maybe it's some small stones. Maybe that's why the chest weighs 42 pounds plus, best to have gloves. It's best to wear gloves so you can move the stones. Who knows? Is that what Huli is saying? Is that maybe a key hint or something that there's an underground parking lot, that the chest could be underground? I don't know. I don't know if that's what you're mentioning at Huli, but
didn't Forrest Fenn mention both parking lots, or two different parking lots?
It wasn't Forrest. It was Douglas. Douglas originally said something about about him parking his car at Northern Arizona University, I believe.
And then also the Denver Museum of something.
I've never been able to make anything heads or tails of that other than he's taken a swipe at some of his colleagues that have criticized his archaeological work, where he wants to be credible. Forrest Fenn wants to be credible about his research at San Lazaro and other places.
Go back and read the whole article, The Mother of Indiana Jones, where he talks about the Society of Academic Archaeologists and his somewhat disdain for academic archaeology. You know?
And so why would he park there at those two places, Denver or yes, but
snubbing his nose.
What are we to gain from that clue? You know, basically, what do we get out of that clue?
Huli, I get it. You're only posting as a possibility, and I agree with you. But it's interesting. I haven't heard anybody mention that before, so it's something new, Huli, that I haven't seen. So I think it was good on you to bring that up.
I actually think that there's a possibility that his special place could be like a ceremonial gravesite, or even some kind of housing, you know. And talking about even getting into like red ochre and hematite, that red streak in the rock is how you know that there was like a Neolithic era gravesite, and that's what they cover themselves to bury them in. And he talks about it in some of his scrapbooks. And you can even, you know, use anagrams and stuff to look at hematite. But I think that it has something to do with him throwing his bones on layers of history, because he talks about layers of wars and you know, people who died and were buried. And if that's the case, there could already be places to put you know, a treasure box where people have died centuries past. And I like, you know, I kind of fantasize. I think that that's a really great theory, whether it's true or not. But
well, I like the way you think, Crysty. I love trying to understand, why would he bury his own? Why would he, you know, kill himself, leave himself there? What does that mean? What is the symbolism of his life's work versus, you know, this last legacy? And I love your thought process. What does that mean? And
my only point is about, you know, going into the red ochre or whatever, and all these different layers. It kind of tends to a little bit of specialized knowledge, in my opinion, that gets us a little far outside the box. It doesn't mean it can't be helpful. I'm not saying that information. It could be
a literal home of Brown, though. That's how you recognize those places. Is there's always going to, if you look it up, it says there's always going to be a red streak. You know, that could be a home of Brown.
Yeah, but that doesn't seem, to me, it doesn't seem straightforward, as he says the poem is. It almost seems like you're bringing outside information, but think about his story about, but just specifically his story about the rust, sliding down the rust pipe. Why on earth would he tell us that if it's not something that's a rust streak somewhere? Like, and if that rust streak, you know, lends itself to, you know, how people bury themselves throughout history, it's just a thought, you know.
Yeah, it's a good thought, because it's one of the few times he mentions Brown in the book. Is that rust streak sliding down the slide gave him that mark on his
that
pants.
Heavy brown stain on the.
And I like to ask myself, what does all this stuff mean to him? There's, you know, it's in the red ochre. It almost seems like he's trying to prove the point about the peace pipe being proven by him, that he's the one that found the peace pipe, and the red ochre was the evidence for the arrowhead collection and other interesting. He seems overly concerned about proving his credibility.
Sure. Which is why he might want the chest found in his lifetime.
So I think he has he's probably holding up his reputation.
Sure.
You know, with Mr. Atlas or somebody with a good biceps, you know, he's probably working very hard to hold up his reputation as long as he can. But I mean, Forrest Fenn is charming. I would never be accusing him of anything wrong. It's just, how do you interpret all these things, and what does it tell us about the treasure, you know?
Yep.
I mean, we can't know till it's found, and we go back and look through everything and say, wow, he was, you know, throwing us a bone here, and this had nothing to do with anything, and everybody, you know, packed up their kids and drove here.
We won't know all that till somebody finds us, and even if they do reveal the correct solve, you know, we're all gonna I think in some way we're all going to own a piece of it. You know, you may not own the whole thing, but there's going to be something that you're going to look at that and go, yeah, I was kind of on that line, even though I was in the wrong state or whatever else, that I was on that same line of thinking.
It's strange how we need that kind of confirmation.
I think we all want that for our own egos. Sure.
Yeah. And if you think about it, it's like the first time in history that a treasure hunt has been crowdsourced the way it is, whether or not we want to admit it. I mean, we all get our information online. We get our information from others.
Yeah.
It's the first time that we've all collectively worked to solve it.
Yep. And again, you could put the right solve out there and everybody would not believe it.
They're going to go nuts. They're going to tear forth.
But the whole point is that we have to agree upon the fact that the correct starting point has probably been mentioned.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the forums and one of these channels or in somebody's solve, it's probably been correctly mentioned.
Yeah, even the correct location's probably been mentioned, possibly photographed.
Within 200 feet. I mean, really, you know, I mean, but again, which one do you pick out? You know, it's all subjective because we're all like, well, it's got to be that one because I believe it's in New Mexico and, you know, Toby's in the right area in the Rios de los Pinos, you know, I mean, who knows? So to wrap all this up, and one of my final questions is if Forrest Fenn is really wanting this thing to be found, and we believe he has made adjustments, how have those adjustments affected us? How have you, Crysty, how have you, Decall, and those of you in the chat room too, how have you adjusted based on those things that Forrest Fenn has put out there? Have you made adjustments?
I'm the worst example there is for adjusting. I have the same solve. I have no intention of looking for a new solve. I have my 800-yard salamander and a floating hat, and if I've got to find something better than that, I don't want to go to that much effort. But my area is so huge. Maybe I'm not adjusting. Maybe I have the right solve, and I can't adjust into the correct 200 feet properly. Maybe I am the guy that had a hiccup here and there, or maybe I'm just some nutcase, you know, spouting off about my ideas. You know, it's hard to tell. You know, I'm still waiting for Fenn Forrest to send me a reject letter here.
Yeah,
not even close. Please stop playing.
He's going to refund you your money back for too far to walk.
I don't even need the money. I'll pay you. I'll pay you. Okay, Forrest.
Put you out of your misery.
Yeah, please put me. I'll build you a nice gate out front, a bigger one.
One that you can't get through with an axe.
Yeah.
Steve, what about you?
You know, for me, Forrest has said, you know, I'm sorry, but I'm not. You want me to put an X on the map? And I think that he's been true to that. I don't think that he has given us enough information. And if he's hinted a lot of things, I mean, who am I to know? And so I feel like he's been pretty consistent with keeping a pretty tight-lipped on the important things. And so for me, the more that I research, the more that I feel like I need to just go back to the poem and go back to the book, and that he hasn't given me what I want. And kind of going out on the outskirts of all these things is kind of proven to be a time waster to me. I mean, I don't have the treasure. So I feel like, you know, I feel like he has just given us some parameters for boundaries, for safety, and those have all been helpful, but I don't think that they've really affected the X that much personally. Yeah. So, you know.
Do you think it's an X?
That's where I'm at.
Nice.
Decall said, do you think it's an X?
What happened?
I don't know. Geez, do you think it's on it? Do you think there's an X involved in the correct location?
She must have lost her audio there.
Oh, okay.
She's getting it back. So if I could answer my own question as far as adjusting, the biggest thing that I've gotten out of what I think the adjustments he's made is the whole get back in the box. That came to me at a very important time when I was coming back from a solve, up in Wyoming. And I was driving back. I remember exactly where I was. I was coming down through Delta, Colorado on the way back into New Mexico. And I pulled over and was reading it because there was a lot of chatter about it. And it basically really reaffirmed my focus on trying to get back in the poem. and just focusing on the poem and really becoming more of a solid poem purist, because the trip I took to Yellowstone back in April of 2016 was a real eye opener. I was so focused on so much information outside of what I deemed the box, all these coincidences in history and geography and everything else that pointed me to that area. And then for him to say that, okay, what was a box I needed to get back into? I needed to refocus on the poem. And that was my point. And that's what, again, going back to the whole questions about, if you knew where Warm Water's Halt was, somewhere in the mountains north of Santa Fe, could you find the correct starting point?
Is that Forrest when you burned the book?
No, that was in the end of April.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That was actually the first part of May. It was actually the first part of May of 2016. Yeah. And that was the whole point of me trying to refocus after going back up to Yellowstone. But then I was still up in Wyoming, so focused on Wyoming, I still wasn't back in the book, or back in the poem. And that whole get back in the box really reiterated that to me. And that box to me was the poem. But I'll capitulate that it could be the book, because there are, like he says, subtle clues in the book, and we know those are supposed to help us. I don't overly focus on those or try to focus on them, not because I think they're just so subjective, based on our own specialized knowledge, feelings, or beliefs that that's something it is. It can lead you down a myriad of rabbit holes, and experience has taught me that. It's not just, I'm just saying that off the cuff. My experience has led me to believe that those things are so subjective. So anyway, cool. Crysty, you got anything last words, or we're gonna wrap this up because I'm out of beer and it's almost time to get out of here.
I'm out of ice, so.
So I think the big thing is that
I'm out of ice, so.
I think that Forrest Fenn, because he's so involved with this, that I think that he is somewhat wanting this thing to be found in his lifetime for a lot of reasons we've talked about tonight. I think one of the key things that Crysty really said was that he doesn't want to leave this for his family to have to deal with after he's gone. I think that he is, but again, the person, if there is somebody that is close or several people that are close, he cannot just give this away to them. He cannot just send them an email saying, Decall, you're within 12 feet, man. You just got to look under this, or you got to look here, and then walk away. And hopefully you find it and don't ever say that you got that email from him. He's got to let that person earn it.
Otherwise, by email, there can't be any of it.
Yeah. It's, otherwise he ruins his whole entire legacy in this thing. So.
I got a feeling it is kind of wearing on him and the family. I think that's real. I think that's very real.
Sure. And I don't think he wants to leave this for them to have to deal with when he's gone. I think Crysty makes a very good point there. I think that's a big point why he, if we are right and we think he has been adjusting, and these are the reasons why, because he wants this thing found before he's gone, and he doesn't want to leave it to his family. And he wants that closure, I think. He wants to have that moment with the finder too. I think that's a big part of it. So wrap this thing up, guys. But I just want to talk about next week, next Tuesday, the 3rd of September, we'll be having Flip the Script number 7. And our guest host is going to be Alan Kay. And his topic is going to be why the treasure is in Yellowstone National Park.
Wow.
And he has asked for another person to be on with him. And I've confirmed that person. It will be his special guest. It is not mine. It is his special guest. Wow. And we'll leave that as a mystery until Tuesday of next week, but it will be September 3rd, right after we all get back from a nice 3-day Labor Day weekend. So hopefully you guys have a great weekend for that. And guys, I always like to ask at the end of the show, if you like this show, come on, everybody, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, that's okay. There's another button for you. And I don't care whether YouTube likes it. I care if you like it. So if you like the show, great, give it a thumbs up. And it's been great. It's been real. I'm out of beer. So it's time to get out of here. And we will catch you all on the flip side. Have a great night, guys. We'll see you.
Check out my YouTube channel, Decall Thomas. Look into my keto, saving lives every day, low blood sugar. Make a change. If you're overweight and you're huffing and puffing, look into it. I believe thoroughly that there's some life-changing information there.
Awesome. Crysty, your last words?
you can hear me.
Yeah. Say it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for some great thought-provoking conversation, and
Awesome.
Great chatting.
Great to see you guys. And all of you in the chat room, we appreciate you coming out and joining us tonight. We wouldn't have a show if it wasn't for you, and we appreciate you guys coming out and hanging out for nearly 2 hours with us. So we will catch you all on the flip side. Have a good night, guys.